Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to the Women's Show yet again. We are still in the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and today is the 12th day, and we speak about child marriages. But today on our show, we want to look at issues of access to justice for women in Uganda. What does it look like? How are we going about the different contentious issues that are happening in our spaces and in this country in regard to access to justice for women? Today on this panel, I have amazing ladies that are doing work in those spaces, but then also that are advocating for women's rights. On my far right, I have a lady from FIDA, and her name is Susan Baluka. Welcome to my panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have next to her a beautiful lady who works with Women Pro Bono Initiative, Beatrice Kayaga. Welcome to this panel.
Thank you.
And next to her, a seasoned political enthusiast and a women's rights advocate, Becky Akchom, who is not new to my panels and to these spaces. Welcome to this panel.
Thank you.
Next to her is a brilliant advocate for women's rights and a very passionate feminist, and one who is also not new to this panel. Welcome to this panel, Marion Shirabo.
So it's a pleasure.
Very much a pleasure as well. I'm glad to have you on this panel, particularly because we are in the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and different issues are being highlighted. But more importantly for us, we want to have a conversation on access to justice and what that looks like for us. And I want to bring you in there, Susan. What's the state of access to justice for women, particularly in Uganda today?
I would say, without being very abstract, that we are not doing that well.
Yeah.
If you look at the different statistics that that are going around, especially when it comes to cases of sexual violence, vis-a-vis the numbers of convictions, we are still not doing that great. But also there are so many structural issues within our justice system that is an impediment to access to justice for women in this country. Ranging from patriarchal norms about women's position in society, to administrative issues like being able to get a medical examination when you report a case of sexual violence in a timely manner and at no cost. That is a very big issue. I would say that we are in a very, very difficult situation. And just to show you that some of these things don't even have to go as far as talking about availability of resources, and it's about attitude change that needs to be done to be able to enable women realize justice. Recently, there was an incident that was on the news, and it's one of the cases that FIDA Uganda has been trying to address, where women were being raped whenever they would try to go to their gardens to pick food. And this arose from a dispute between two clans in Gulu over land. And that spiraled into a whole sort of civil war between the clans, so to speak. And the people who are, are suffering the brunt of all this violence is actually the women, because the clan that was overpowered was driven away from their homes. Their huts were burnt where they stay. They were not allowed to access their gardens, and whenever they would go, they would find there are other men who would beat them and even subject them to sexual abuse, particularly rape them. So, and yet they tried to report these violations to the police. And the feedback that they were given was that there was a command from the resident district commander of that police not to do any investigations or conduct any arrests, because it would affect the goodwill that is being built through the mediations that is being done between the two clans. So you see that the issue of violence that women have been subjected to is treated as trivial and secondary and, not important. So meanwhile, as they're trying to do the negotiations between the two clans, of course, it is the men who are in those negotiations. Meanwhile, the women have to go out to look for what they are going to feed their families, and in so doing, they are subjected to physical violence, and the local police is not willing to, investigate and hold people to account. So I think it's that bad when it comes to how patriarchal norms are actually affecting women's access to justice.
Yes. And I love that you speak about that, because it brings me into the conversation I want to have on the structure of the forms of justice people can go to, especially the institutions that we have. Are there alternatives? Because the narrative that women are constantly put to the side in conflict resolution issues and resolutions, and yet they're the forefront of the issues that are happening in their communities. When you speak about issues of land, the women are front and center of these conversations. How do we deal with creating alternative ways to access to justice, especially when the structure or the formal justice centers are not providing justice for women? I'll bring you in that conversation there.
Okay. Thank you so much for that question. So we are looking at the fact that the justice system has failed women in one way or the other, and what is the solution that is there for women who have been failed by the justice system. Basically, what this requires is reforming the entire system, because the system is violent. Because when we look at the fact that in rape cases or defilement cases, the criminal standard is beyond reasonable doubt. We see that the law places the burden on the victim to actually prove that they are being raped or defiled. And how do we rectify that? So there is need for change in the law. You understand? Yes, the beyond reasonable doubt has been there for ages. But how about that we approach certain systems in a manner that enables women to access justice? So when we look at other forms of justice that are present, you may find that a witness or a victim tells you, you know what, I just want them to stop beating me. A client comes to you and tells you, you know what, this man beat me throughout the night. But how do I stop him from beating me? I just want him to stop. I don't want to divorce. I don't want to do any of that. I want him to stop. They don't want the system because the system is violent. But how do we help them? Of course, the alternative dispute resolution is also there. It's an alternative for women to sit on the table and have a conversation with some of the people or the perpetrators, so that we have this resolved, because this is an outside mechanism that does not subject the woman to the long procedure, because remember, this long procedure usually makes some people drop out in the long run. I don't see why I'm going to court every day. The justice is not quick. It's not coming very quick. Even the cost of it all. Even the cost itself. It is expensive by the time you pay for, if it's civil, you pay for all those pay for the court fees, all that. So we have the alternative dispute resolution that is available. But then also the system tries to bring in plea bargain. The justice system that we have in Uganda tries to bring in plea bargain. With plea bargain is the accused and complainant sit on the same table, and it's on the basis that the accused actually admits that I committed this crime against you. However, I'm praying for a lesser sentence or a caution, or you give me this. So the system has tried to kind of create that, so that there is easy access to justice for the victims. But there is a loophole still in the plea bargain rules, because you cannot say that someone who has committed murder, who has done the grave acts of rape, they should, there's offenses that you look at and really it's so grave that you just can't sit down and bargain your way through so that you have a lesser sentence. The reason as to why the laws exist is to prevent the crime in the first place. And if someone is not punished enough, then the rest of the community will never learn. So that is the other issue. The law has tried to give in that leeway, but there is crimes that I feel should never be put on the table for plea bargain. You understand? And so, yes. So And also resorting to our systems that have been in existence that are not exactly formal, besides the alternative dispute resolution, but in our day-to-day life, or before we had the justice system placed in, we had ways of resolving conflict. But we look at it in such a way that some of them is to, given the fact that it's only men who would sit, get the issue resolved. But if the justice system is actually very expensive and hard for these women, there is cases that cannot actually be settled in our communities. It is too bad, and we have to resort. But those which can be settled within our community, for example, there are minor boundary issues. Call in the local leaders, call in the legal representatives. Let's have the issue settled rather than running around in court. Come, to and from court makes it quite hard for women to access justice. And then we need the systems to actually also recognize that women are not homogeneous. That we have different women who are disabled. We need women. We have women who are disabled. We have women who do sex work. We have different categories of women. And how have we helped them as a community access justice? We are working on a case in Gulu, and in this case involves ladies who have a mental disability, and these ladies were actually raped. And these ladies walked to a police station for help. And given the fact that they had their treatment notes that show that, at a certain point they are not in their state of mind, the police refuses to investigate. They refuse to investigate. They refuse to look for the perpetrators. So how about that we have a community that protects such people to ensure that they have access to justice? If you are the local leader in that case, in that area, what have you done if such a matter comes before you? Because for this woman, you find that at the police station, if at all she's blind or deaf, there is not an interpreter. How is that evidence taken down? You see, so all that becomes harder. And then preservation. When a woman is raped or defiled, her body is literally a crime scene.
True.
You don't have to shower the day before. No, you have to stay with the sperms wherever they are. Go to the police because you need the police form. They need to check to see if you are actually raped, because that's the standard that our law has put in place. Yes, that's the standard that the law has put in place. And so that entire process is traumatizing to the person. And how have we helped this person access justice the quicker way?
Without being traumatized.
Without being traumatized. That means that we need the police officers to be trained more on that, not to re-victimize the victims. And also we look at the fact that in as much as I've been raped, or someone has gone to report after days and months of being raped, such cases should also be recorded. Because they tell you, how come you've come after 3 months? What does that mean? Aren't you telling a lie? So how do we ensure that this entire justice system encompasses and helps women access justice way earlier, even quicker? You see, there is need to also have the entire system around the victim. What does the victim want at the end of the day? Me as a lawyer, I'll just come in, let's go to court. But have I consulted? What do you want as my client? All I want is an apology. Maybe all I want is this. And have I factored in the fact that my client is traumatized, that they need psychosocial support?
Do they need to be in that space in that moment? True.
Yeah.
I hear you there.
We need the alternative methods are there. The law has tried to put them in place, but also the main justice system, there is a lot of clearing that needs to be done, reforming, making sure that the entire justice is victim-centered. What do they want? Are they protected even in the process of getting justice? Are the witness protection laws in place? Have they, ensured that this person is able to access justice?
Becky, let me bring you in there, because from the two, when Susan shared and when I listened to also what they were sharing, it's very key. Beatrice was sharing. It's very key for us to look at how we then create allies, and we had this conversation even last week on one, the knowledge gap between who is then able to get access to justice. How do we come from the place of the police, from the grassroots, because from the chairmen themselves, do they even know how to deal with some of these issues in regard to access to justice, to the police system, before we even come to the justice system, to the courts of law and any other thing? But how do we also create not only allies, but increase women in these spaces to be able to understand the issues, because they understand our issues? Or is there a deficit that even the women that are there don't understand the issues at hand? Is there a knowledge gap that we need to deal with in those areas of justice, access to justice?
Thank you for that. From what Beatrice has shared, when you look at cases of injustice, especially that women go through, there's always been an issue of confidentiality. Thank you. My Luo is hitting me now. and so confidentiality has been something that is missing a lot in cases of justice. That when, for example, a case of a girl who has been raped in a rural community, even before it reaches the police, the community itself has already blown this out of proportion, in a sense that we have not kept her name, her profile, her picture hidden. And so I am always angry when I see a picture of a woman who is being abused or who's been beaten, and it's all over. There are cases where we need to understand that, yes, this needs to be on media, this needs to be shared. But for a young person, for a young child under the ages of 18, a young girl, she still has a future, even for a woman. And so we need to learn to practice. And so in access to information, you find that our community has not understood how best to handle this. But then also I would want to look at it from the aspect of the setup of our society. We must and still must acknowledge that we live in a patriarchal society where there is literally male dominance over issues, how the legal system is literally male dominated. We've had cases like Samantha in the legal system complaining or sharing issues of harassment that she has experienced, and how this took time to be handled. And this same person that was accused was promoted. And so we start to question that. Then we go to our cultural setup. I come from, I am now, I can say, I come from a community where even when you look at clan heads, you will not find a clan head that's a woman lead. That is a woman. There is no clan that will have a woman as a leader. And so I was looking at the hierarchy of our cultural leaders, and I was sad to find that the only position where we had a woman take on was gender. And this is in 2021. The others were mainly assistants. And so you start to question that if these issues arose at a cultural level, how are they being handled? How are women issues being, beyond the injustice, issues of rights, widows? We know in our rural settings, in our rural communities, that women in rural communities don't have access to land. They till this land, they farm. They don't own it. Like she says, they are literally abused without. It's not just the rape. The abuse is now going into even that when you harvest and take back home, because the land is owned by your husband, he has the right to sell what you have. And so it stems back to the little basic nitty-gritties of our society and how it is set. And so also this in a way affects every woman, that even when we try to advocate, one of the things that we should be doing that needs to actually be done is to let women, because the way society is set, women don't know that actually this is how I'm supposed to do. When you go and tell a woman about being independent, she'll actually think you've come to destroy her marriage. True. So about marital rape, she'll actually think like, oh, my husband has rights over my body. If our whole constitution does not really want to understand what marital rape is, then definitely how does a rural woman understand it? And so on an advocacy agenda, I think there is need to, even while we have empowered women so much, they still need for more emphasis on issues that really matter for the rural woman. that an urban woman is able to understand some of these issues. But for a woman from a rural community, a woman maybe from a key population, her issues are different from the issues of an urban woman. Her injustices are totally different. The system is not pro her. An urban woman knows, I need to do this. When I am raped, this is what starts to happen.
They may also know,
they may not even know, but she may also know, I can start to negotiate now.
Yes.
I can start the negotiation, the bargain you're talking of. A woman may not even have information on this. And so in a way, society pulls the woman backwards. For me, I still hit back at the patriarchy in society when I think of women like in key populations, examples of sex workers, because we come from a society where also the law has not been pro-women, especially for women like sex workers, that in a case where your client rapes you, a sex worker is not considered a woman
the narrative of the ideal victim.
You're not considered a person of sound mind to actually speak to an issue of rape. What were you doing? But I want to come to the school of thought that when someone decides to engage in sex work, they definitely know what they are doing, and they decide to do it as a choice. And so, for that, for women of key populations, for widows, for LGBTI communities, and so in a sense, you find that because of the system, though our laws are set, you find that cases that happen in some of these populations, in these key populations, cannot be reported because our system is already biased. For an example of a lesbian woman, she cannot report a case of maybe corrective rape, as it is called. So we normalize corrective rape. And in fact, we are creating an injustice. And this is usually done by family. And so in a way, our society normalizes the abnormal to be normal, in the way we still normalize marital rape among women as being a privilege, that your husband actually wants to sleep with you. And so for me, I think it still goes back to the whole issue of information, like you said. We just need to share more knowledge, we need to discuss more, and it's just about also the women's movement coming up a bit more vibrant on some of these issues, and seeking audience, but also with our legislators, because every time I come to speak from a political perspective as well, that every time we speak as a country, we may speak as the women's movement, but if our legislators do not understand these issues, I just had last week, we have a member of parliament who is absconding from his
fatherly duties. Marion, let me bring you in. Let me bring Marion in, because that's something I want us to talk about. The women's movement had progress, and we celebrated these things. We celebrated the employment bill being passed in parliament. We celebrated the succession bill. The sexual offences bill was a little bit still touchy for the men in parliament. But I want to talk about the fact that there is then the legal aid bill of 2019 and we don't know the progress yet. I think maybe the people from these spaces will let us know. But I want to speak to the fact that there is a lot we are doing to make it easy for women to access justice. Even in issues of succession and owning land and owning property, and being able to be custodian of the things your parents left for you. But yes, our success and our progress has been marred in different issues that deal with, let me say, intersectionality, in the patriarchy. How are we going to break the barriers, the sticky issues that, are holding the progress of, especially in access to justice for women? How do we deal with that?
I think in dealing with that, we have to look at even the bills that we have passed. Who have they benefited?
True.
Because I think even the people who work in the legal aid and work in those communities will tell you half of those women do not know what you're talking about when you're talking about the Succession Act and what. Secondly, almost if 80% of those women that you work with, which are the rural women, and even here in Kampala, by the way, women in the slums and everywhere will tell you things. First of all, we don't know them, but where do we access those lawyers? How do we even pay legal fee? As someone who has tried to get justice for victims of sexual violence, it has become hard for me because, first of all, getting that pro bono lawyer that you need, And even if you get them, it's not to maybe criticize or anything, but the truth is they do not work as hard for you as someone that you
Because
have
it's
paid.
pro bono.
Because it's pro bono.
True.
And the fact that this person probably has 1,000 cases on their neck, and they're just looking at one person, and they're doing it all for free. So the attention they're going to give you on your case, on your one case, compared to the ones they already have and they haven't yet settled down, it's going to be very little. So you find that even when you have seemingly good laws, and we're not saying the laws are perfect, but they do provide some protection. There is no way this average Ugandan woman can actually effect those laws. And you will see a lot of classism in the people who access, who make use of these laws. You will see she's an upper class or middle class woman, you know, very relatively educated,
Can access the power structures.
Can access the power structures. And what is the percentage compared to the average woman population you get? But for me on that issue, and with the whole radicalization, how do we go about it? I will agree with her that then you need to think outside of the box, you know? Then you need to think about what are the accessible structures of justice that already exist in the community, but maybe patriarchal in nature. That when there's a clan dispute, there's a clan head and they have to sit together. But the problem with that then becomes that these men come with their own, you know, that we talked about, you know, before the show becomes cultural fundamentalism. They have their own religious beliefs. So most of the time when they're sitting down to dialogue, the women are a non-issue in this equation. Yes. And yet, that would be the most accessible form of justice that this woman would get. It is in the community, it is free. She knows who the clan heads are, she knows who to go to in this. So how do you, as a judicial system that is looking to make justice accessible, go down to these communities and try to create a mindset change. Making it inclusive. This local structure, you know. Like I remember how we used to do for the local courts. I don't know if they're still active. But one of the challenges they had was that, you know, it's a local court, everyone knows where it is, but the nature of the people who sit there, the kind of, and we need to understand that perhaps we do a lot of criticizing, but we also need to understand how most of the people in this system have grown up in. That they've grown up in a very religious society, very patriarchal society. So there's no one giving them a counter narrative of what things ought to be there. For them, they have learned, you know, the man is the head of the household, the women are just helpers in the community, that whatever the man decides, it is the end of it. So you're not giving a counter narrative to actually challenge these belief systems and some of these things that these people know. We have seen that in the judiciary, it has worked that when women rights organizations got in to train judges on how to handle sexual violence cases, that the judgments did change. That we have, even when it comes to property, we have cases like Chigongo versus Chigongo because there has been a change. That women's rights organizations have been very active in telling them, you see, look at things through the gender lens, that you cannot exclude 60% of the population, and this is how you're excluding them in your justice system. That when you're looking at a woman's contribution, look at domestic work and that unpaid domestic work and how she has helped, what her contribution has been to that, because it's a very significant contribution that you cannot ignore. So for me, it goes back to the question that you asked Rebecca, knowledge, how do we increase? I think for most of the part that while we are focusing on putting in the good laws, focusing in everything, I think most of the things that we forget is helping our society unlearn. Helping them unlearn and relearn some things, because we forget to give a counter narrative to some of these things. That even in the media, okay, can we have a counter narrative? If you do not want cases of violence to be reported like that, have a counter narrative of how it should be reported. You get, have a sample space that guides people, because people already have theirs, and this is how society has trained them. That you see, when it comes to sexual violence, we always look at the victim, what she was putting on, because that is what their religion was.
And the reporting will be on the victim and not the perpetrator.
So do you have a counter narrative for that? Do you have, let me see, a feminist blog or a feminist newspaper? Perhaps we need to invest in these things, in these different knowledges, you know, sources of information. You get, I think it goes a long way, because already in your education system, the patriarchy is doing its work quite well in teaching them how to view the world around them. I always give this example, that since P1, they've been telling them that the head of the household is a man. The one who owns the land is a man. The clan leader is a man. That is right from primary school.
So it cuts out the woman from the beginning.
Exactly. So the patriarchy, for them, they have their eyes on the goal. That by the time this kid gets out of our hands, it knows what the format is, you know. It has the template for what we are doing. And I think for us in the women's rights movement, as feminists, I think that's one thing we have missed out on. That these things only happen maybe at law school, in the gender class at law school, and it ends there. And you come out with this brilliant women's rights activists. All of them are lawyers, because they have all had access to this information. They all know the good arguments, but it's nowhere in any other college. Even before you go to the grassroots, is it anywhere else in the colleges you get? It's not there. That's why an accountant, a female accountant, will sit next to you, and still the lawyer will
be the one to pick the tea.
And she will be the one advocating so much for the patriarchy. And the lawyer will just look at her and be like, "What's wrong?" But she didn't have access to the information. She did not unlearn the things that you unlearned. So you cannot blame her. So I think that is where the gap is. How it is high time that we started advocating for gender studies to be compulsory.
So people understand these things.
So that they understand
the patriarchy is going to fight you.
That's what needs to happen. So that even when the police officer is having his trainings, and we have had these discussions about sexual harassment within the police force, why women don't want to join that, you know. I know, for example, the U.S. Army even went as far as changing the arrangements of how their backpacks how they are arranged, because they used to put heavy weights up, then the
lighter things
down, and now they had to change that format because they realized that a woman's autonomy was different. That for her, she could go down,
the lighter things up.
Because being down,
makes sense. Yes.
You
makes
get
sense. I've never thought of that.
Yeah. So it has to be weighed in everything, because guess what? Women are in everything you do.
Yeah.
And for since time memory, we have been excluded. We are there, but we're not acknowledged.
We're like by the way. Oh, by the way, even the women.
You get, and that needs to stop.
That needs to stop.
Yeah.
Let me bring you in there, Susan, because you work around a lot of legal aid. But outside the confines of your office, there was a push for the legal aid bill. What's the progress there? Because we are imagining that if the consolidated fund is there, it should be able to help us, create redress for some of the things that are costly in access for justice for women.
Yeah. Well, for starters, in the most recent convening we had as members of Uganda Law Society, where the legal aid bill was brought up, I think that was about a month or two ago. They were soliciting for our input because the bill was at committee stage. Yeah, so it has not yet been enacted into law. But what I would have to say is that it's going to have to take a whole lot. But most of these laws have funds. There is the HIV Prevention and Control Act. It has a provision about the HIV fund, the AIDS Trust Fund. Then there was another law that has something in relation to a fund. I think the law on drug control. It has something in relation to a fund to assist people who are drug dependent. But there has always been a lot of controversy when it comes to putting those provisions into practice. There is always so much back and forth when it comes to money issues. But I feel like it's going to take more than a legal provision that talks about having a fund to make access to justice a reality. And that is a very important aspect of enabling women access justice, because while I agree that yes, we need to change the mindsets and and that learn the art of giving the alternative narrative in all these different communal justice systems at the grassroots. I think it is still equally important for us to invest heavily in enabling women, especially indigent women, rural women, access justice within the formal setting. Because even when you look at the communal justice system, even if you were to say that, okay, we're in an ideal world where there was no patriarchy at that level, I long for that day, but anyway, there's no patriarchy at that level. The kinds of cases that they can deal with, like Beatrice was saying, you're not going to deal with a rape case or a defilement case at local council level. It's going to have to go to to the formal justice system, because then that person has to be dealt with in a way that will make sure that they actually reform before they can go back into society. So you see that you really do have to invest heavily in the formal justice system, and that goes beyond having some sort of consolidated fund, which will probably never operationalize. I think, practically speaking, we need to the Law Society, for example, will have to be more serious and more strict with issues of what do they call that? The pro bono hours that private lawyers are able to give,
so that they get better points.
Exactly. I think instead of organizing 1 million webinars and going to God knows where, I think they can scale up on some of those things. Because much as we have the legal aid service providers, they are dealing with a lot. They are spread out thin. So we need all hands on deck in that regard. Then there's a lot that also needs to be done in terms of investing in education, public massive education, informing people about the availability of these different justice mechanisms and how they can access them. I think there was also in the legal aid bill, there was something. No, there's no legal aid bill. There's something to do with the paralegal advisory services as well. That is something that also needs to be upskilled, because when you look at the different communal justice actors that even as the civil society organizations are now trying to engage, we have the legal volunteers, we have paralegals. These are people within these communities who, yes, they've undergone the training, but when you engage with them, you realize that they can actually do much more if they are given more knowledge, equipped with more knowledge, and if they're also equipped with more resources to be able to assist people at the grassroots to access justice. At least they can take you as far as getting your case reported to police and actually pushing. Some of them are as active as they're that active that they can actually push for the investigations to be concluded. They even know the procedures that if the police officer is errant, you can report to the police professional standards unit. But sometimes you find that they're also limited in how much they are able to do, because sometimes resources are not enough. Some of them are enthusiastic, but they don't have enough knowledge, so they may even get intimidated by the law enforcement officers. And all the questions of, what do you mean you're a paralegal? You don't have any authority to tell me anything.
You're not a lawyer. That's
you
what they'll
understand.
tell you.
So I think there is need to also streamline and formalize paralegal services as well, and all those things are actually part of an integral aspect of the right to access to justice. When you look at the normative content of that right, both within the regional human rights framework and even the international human rights framework. So yeah, I think there is a lot of energy and input that needs to be put into our structures beyond just saying that you're going to have a consolidated fund. Money is not, I think we have this conception that yes, money is important, but there is nothing more that beats the political will to get things done. And I think sometimes even the rights activists and civil society organizations, they get bogged down with all the different issues they're advocating for. Today you're here, you're advocating for access
the next
to
day
justice.
in something else.
Tomorrow you're advocating for something else, and you have donor reports to prepare, and then somehow everything becomes so mundane and mechanical,
and then it gets washed under
it does become organic. You now start focusing on technicalities, like we should have a law that says have a consolidated fund. Yet if you really think organically through these things, you realize that if we can streamline our structures first and foremost, that can be a starting a good starting point. So yeah, I think the legal aid bill, the contingent fund is great, yes, but we need to do a whole lot more than that.
Ladies, as we wind up, let me first cut you there because these guys will make me run away from here. So as we wind up, I need us to, think about the different things that we can do. One, as a women's movement, to help access for justice happen. What can we do better? In 1 or 2 minutes, as we close, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, 2 minutes strictly, and then we close, because this is a conversation we're going to keep coming back to. But what do we, push for the women's movement, for the justice team in Uganda, and then on an individual basis, what then can we also do as people? Because I've heard you, I have learned more, but what then can I do?
Okay. Generally, as a women's movement, we need to embrace the diversity within women. And this will help us to have laws, to enact laws, the laws that we push for that are intersectional, that cover every woman, be it a sex worker, be it, someone from the LGBTQ community, be it any other person, because every time we have laws that are not gender neutral, that do not have a gender lens, that have not been applied to using a gender lens, we go miles back. When we look at the Sexual Offences Bill, it is actually a good law, but those regressive provisions within it take us way back, and it becomes hard for women in those various categories, the sex workers, to access justice. Can you imagine? Because she has been raped. First of all, she's a sex worker. Then the aspect of consent has been watered down. So this woman cannot actually go and seek justice. So it becomes quite hard. So we have to actually not only seek for gender equality, but then we also have to look at the equity that also comes with it. This addresses the intersectional forms or issues that are underlying every big issue that every day we look at. If we are saying that, yes, this is the law that we want in place, let us cover all forms of women that are existing in the entire spectrum, the disabled women, the able-bodied women, not the class, the classism laws that have been kind of sprouting. So this helps us to be like more of on a bigger approach, a multi-sectoral approach than, yes, we are pushing for gender equality and then we forget about equity. We are saying we want women to own their property in their homes, but then we forget about
the widows.
Yes, we forget about the widows. What are those things that make it easy for women to achieve, to be a whole human being like the men, to be on the same level with the men? The issue of equity must be put in place. And we should not only stick on equality. Yes, equality will be given to, yes, it will be given to us. Let there be more women in parliament. Yes, they will show up. Let there be this. Let the pregnant girls go back to school. Yes, the law has accepted for them to go back to school. But have you ensured that the ministry has put in place the systems that will enable this pregnant girl to go back to school? But first of all, even when she's pregnant, while in school, will she be able to stay in those conditions? Do you have, those necessities that are needed by a pregnant woman to be, comfortable in a school setting and all that? And in the first place, these girls should not be pregnant because the system has generally failed them. So we must look at intersectional issues as that will help as a whole. This will help us address everything.
Becky, speak to power structures. What do we or can we do to help people in power structures help women access justice?
For starters, I would want to say people, especially leaders, and I don't want to speak to parliamentary leaders only because we keep on thinking that power starts from up. In parliament is where all the laws are passed and everything. But actually, I think starting from culture, Marion said it quite clearly. We need to start having serious conversations, gender conversations, feminist conversations. Because every time we speak of gender, we think we have spoken of feminism, which is not true actually. Which is not true. And so we need to start having conversations around women's rights, as rights for all, and as a human right, because as a human right, yes. And so we also need to start having a clear boundaries. And I want to say clear boundaries because in civil society spaces, you find organizations saying, I'm pro this, I'm pro human rights and this. But then when it comes to some law, there is a pullback. There is, that doesn't concern us. And so you find in a way we leave a certain group of women out. Behind. And so we need to start having clear, distinctive boundaries on where I'm not going to do this. But for long, we've had organizations that say, I stand for women's rights, but then they speak to the funding opportunity only for that, and so have just a token representation in such. But then I would also want to say, for organizations like FIDA and Pro Bono that work with women and offer pro bono services, that there is need to grow and groom more organizations and support more bubbling organizations as well, because truthfully you haven't spoken to this, but you're overwhelmed.
Yes,
I keep on seeing FIDA may be in every part of the country. Pro Bono has actually come to support in our women pro bono, but you're extremely overwhelmed. And so there is need for more organizations.
And I think they're overwhelmed because they're the ones we know.
Because that might also
not just the ones we know, the ones we can believe in our ability. No, because there are those that come with an intention, and they have been doing it for a long time. And so there is that there is need for more bubbling organizations to come up. But also at individual level, we also need to grow a mindset, because if as civil society, as political activists, as human rights defenders, we do not grow our mindset into thinking of the rights of all women, then we are surely not speaking to the issues.
Marion, in 1 minute, I want to bring you in 1 minute. On an individual basis, what then do we do to help women access justice in 1 minute?
Well, and just to tie everything around, and maybe to speak more to what Rebecca is saying, I think I've learned so much from the Me Too movement, especially its grass structuring, how it started out, that it in turn grew into something big that was able to bring down power systems, powerful men who had for a long time ignored these issues,
and had evaded
justice. And they had been so much that they had even formed the laws to advantage them. And I began to see how states, maybe in America especially, change even the way they looked at sexual violence, that they even started to change the scope of evidence that is given in. That now even if maybe 10 girls come up against you, we start to listen to you, and we start to actually investigate you, which was not there before. So for me, it is a long shot, but when I speak on, I think someone has to, and it's not to say that there are not people there, but someone needs to do the grassroots building, like starting it from that. Because even when you talk to the Maria Matendes, they will tell you that the problem with the affirmative action was from its top-bottom approach. Exactly. So you need to build the women's movement from this rural woman, help her understand justice, not from the boardroom kind of way, but the way she understands it. Because it doesn't, you might put in place so many laws, but if you do not bring it in the perspective which she understands it, you lose them. If you do not make her understand that she has agency to control her destiny now, that times have changed, that she can actually own land, that she can actually not be beaten in her home, that's not a sign of what? If you cannot start building it from that grassroots, justice, we will keep on with the same thing of we are making laws, there's a class system, there is a what, the women's movement is dying, but your women's movement is excluding this grassroots. Exactly. So you need to start her from there, that even when you're making laws, if what she understands is maybe that clan system, perhaps you need to innovate the way your form, how you understand justice structures. That maybe you need to start thinking, okay, how can I make this clan thing work
for the woman?
For her. You get. We have been doing this for a long time, and clearly it's not working.
It's not working.
Maybe you need to re-event, you know. Most people talk about the Kamunye case, that whole going to Kanyamunye case, that whole going to the cultural leaders. We have a lot of course, also may have mixed feelings about it, that how can you kill a man?
But if it's working.
But you haven't had the family of Kanyamunye complain after that. So maybe we should start to reimagine what justice means to us. And given the fact that most of these justice systems that we now have are actually foreign in their nature, maybe we need to start to evaluate and think, what does the African conception of justice actually mean, even to the African woman?
For now, because I am overwhelmed with knowledge, but not because it's something I can't take, but time is a matter in this country. I want to thank you ladies for coming out today, but especially for highlighting key issues that are in our justice system. I've learned something, that the grassroots still work. So access to justice for women is different today. But I am glad that we can have this conversation and find ways to change and also to build again. I've been your host, Trisha Gloria Navae, and I am glad that you came by. Please like, subscribe, comment, and continue these conversations. Thank you for tuning in today. Bye.